don't drive the microeconomy with credit. You drive it with savings. The minute you are funding through credit something which is not viable in the first place, you begin to crash, and that's where your loan book goes belly up. Equity look at, you must save fast. So that means once you have a culture of saving, you're already driving something which has potential. It's just a question of having credit to drive it up.
Why is this model not being adopted more broadly across the continent?
It is knowledge. Many people don't understand it, and so it is actually forums like this and probably universities and institutes which then needs to understand the model, how equity grew, the mistakes it made, and the lessons learned, and then scale it. Because for you to bring as many people as possible who are saving very little, it has also to be in a large scale for it to make profitable sense. That's why in Kenya, equity has 60% of all the bank accounts because of scale. Now, because of you are able to mobilize so many small savers, the end result, the benefit to the bank is then, because they are very small savings, to pay them, because you know they will come, and to pay them is very, very difficult. So our interest rate payment to them is 2.8%, but then you are able to lend, on lend. So the end result is that the bank has a very healthy net interest margin because of the scale of deposits you are able to mobilize, which are cheap, and then you are able to onward lend. So for Equity Bank, for every customer you loan to, you have 10 accounts which are saving. So a ratio of 1 to 10.
Okay,
that model is now very important.
I'm going to step in there.
Yes.
In case anyone wasn't convinced the first time. Okay, now, so we have about 25 minutes left, and I would have liked to involve you sooner, but I hope that what we've done is, there's a lot more to be said, but I hope we've sort of provoked some thoughts and some questions, and I'm really keen to get some perspectives from the audience now. So far, to me, it seems we've established that rapid growth and inclusive growth need to go hand in hand. The question is how, on what terms, and the role of government, as always, it really stands out. And without the right policy environment, it's not that the solutions are mysteries to us. They're usually known, but for whatever reason, the environment is not conducive to acting on them. Show of hands to see if anyone would like to get involved. Yes, we'll start with Dr. Ndemo at the front.
Okay, my name is Pitange Ndemo. I want to congratulate you for what you've said, but I feel that we are confusing ourselves when we keep on referring to Asia and whatnot. Africa missed the first wave of invention, second wave of invention it missed. The third wave of invention, which is being precipitated by ICTs, Africa is in it. That's how Julius is talking about financial inclusion, which was something we couldn't figure out how to get most Africans to be banked. That has been demystified by use of ICT. What is happening in the agricultural sector, it's actually being revolutionized as we speak through ICTs. There is so many applications now that are bringing productivity into the agricultural sector. It can't grow with the old mind of thinking about agriculture. Where government needs to come in is to transform the way we have looked at the minimalist mentality that we have had in Africa on small farms or land subdivision. This is where the government needs to come in strongly and encourage large scale and mechanization of farming. And that is what would transform the poor and bring them to the level we are talking about inclusivity. Otherwise, the educational sector is being transformed through the ICTs. Health sector is being transformed through the ICTs. There are some places in this country where you could not get a doctor, but now they are able to access services, healthcare services because of ICTs. I think what we need to be talking about here is how do we get broadband to every human being in Africa? Because we have underestimated Africans that they can't use new technologies to create inclusive systems. This is the mistake we made in Kenya, that or maybe just a few people who would want this broadband or who would use mobile money. It has been changed. These people, necessity is the matter of all inventions. If we provided broadband, it's going to change the agricultural sector, the health sector, educational sector, and that's how we begin inclusivity. And because they have been able to access this knowledge in the internet, they can now begin to see new opportunities in the manufacturing sector. We cannot force it on them that government must put money into manufacturing or something. It can't work. It works, it comes by itself when people have become more knowledgeable about this and getting this information. So my submission is that we need to provide broadband across Africa and leave the people. Maybe government intervention in a very small way through putting money into research, because that is where we have a problem now in the ICTs, to put more money into research and also researchers to begin to cooperate with the private sector. That is where the problems are. Africans are not doing enough research. Africans are not understanding the problems, which would make it easier for developers to provide solutions that would help with inclusivity. This is where we need to put effort, and government to discourage the current methods of agriculture, expanding, creating large farms. This is my submission.
Thank you. We'll take a few more comments and questions. Yeah?
I have an observation and a question. On ICTs, I have a somewhat different opinion. I think information technology will be just a minimum condition for being competitive, but not a solution. Actually, it's just a condition. And actually, it poses quite a number of challenges because it makes geography irrelevant. It makes even talking about Africa irrelevant because ICT makes the world in one big shopping place. Take banking, it could be that tomorrow equities competitor sits actually in China, you know, so that's also the side of ICT, I think. But I had actually a question. I'm a little bit surprised that none of the panel members questioned whether the current growth was actually sufficient for having a real inclusive economy. Because as I said this morning, I think that the actually growth numbers, combined with the fact that capital get a disproportionate share of the profits, is actually completely insufficient for really making African countries as a society richer.
Great, thank you. We have to move on because there's quite a few hands, but I'll try to come back to this. I'll try to come back to that. I'm going to take a couple of more comments. There's a lady at the back and then a comment at the front. Yeah, all the way at the back, I think.
Okay, thank you, Teresa Moyo.
And then we'll come back to the panel after that. Yes, please.
Okay, yes, I wanted to ask, well, first of all, to make a comment. In answer to the question about what should we start with inclusive, I mean, can both be done at the same time or growth first? My answer to that or comment is we should be mindful, what is the purpose of growth? Growth is not an end in itself, but it's a means to an end. Growth must serve the needs and aspirations of a nation. So if we take it from that angle, to me it's quite clear that we need to pursue both growth and inclusivity simultaneously. It's not easy, which leads me to my next comment and question. If we are to achieve both goals, it means we need to plan the entire process. We need an integrated development planning approach to managing all these processes where you bring in macroeconomic policies, regulatory frameworks, rural development, and all that. But my question is to the panelists, what is your take on the role of development planning in the contemporary world? Because when you read the literature, there are some who are against it, that we are interfering, or governments are interfering with markets, and yet that planning is very necessary because you begin to set your growth targets. At the same time, you also set your development targets, which is where you can bring in inclusivity. So it seems to me that you can actually do everything simultaneously, but planning is very key. As government, then you have strong institutions, public institutions specializing in different activities, your infrastructure development, your rural development, and so on and so forth. So if you can comment on that, I'll appreciate your role, your take on the role of development planning, because there's still some skepticism. And part of the reason being that many African countries have got development plans which they are not implementing. Yes. And people become skeptical about whether or not these plans work, and yet they are very important.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll take a lady at the front, and then we'll get some responses, and we'll try to come back to the audience.
Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Sikasa from Housing Finance Foundation, and I'd just like to pose to the panel. I've not had any significant contribution about the role of technical skills in developing an inclusive economy. We know very well that for all economic development to take place, there needs to be the technical aspects. The discussion has been very much largely about agriculture, and we know there is a serious shortage of artisan skills. You know, plumbers, mercenaries, and people who are actually involved, and people who can actually do the work with their hands. We're talking about capacity development, but the technical aspect is largely ignored. And I'd just like to hear a comment from the panelists about the same. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So a few issues have been raised there. And I'd just like to give the panel an opportunity to respond. Anyone like to get us started? Yeah, Agnes, please.
Thank you. I guess I mentioned it earlier, and I will mention it again. If we don't piggyback and take advantage of the ICT revolution that is happening on this continent, in whatever sector, agriculture or not, it would be wrong. It's penetrated faster than any other infrastructure or even technology that's out there, and it's just in our interest that we piggyback on that and make it productive. Now, on development planning, I don't think that, actually, you answered your own question. It's extremely important. We need to prioritize. We need to know when to do what. The question is, do we actually do it? Do we actually come through on these plans? If you pick one or two countries where something is happening right, where development is happening right, even on this continent, you will see that at the bottom of that, there's a very, very clear planning process, and there's a very clear process on how to implement on these plans. So I don't think that there's a shortcut around that. I think that it's very important. We don't have resources that can go forever. We only have definite resources, and the only way you go about that is to use them in a manner that is very planned and very well prioritized, and to know exactly what you're looking for. Development, inclusivity, I guess the two of them are extremely important, what we are doing. And most countries are struggling with that. But I think what a lot of countries that don't come through on is how to come through on the planning process. And I'll just give you an example. A lot of people sometimes ask themselves, oh, so what is going on in this Rwanda we hear about? What is happening? Actually, what is happening in Rwanda is they make plans, and they have weekly mechanisms of following up on those plans. Like, there's a whole process of how to evaluate on how well we are following up on plans. The traffic light system has become part of everybody's life in Rwanda if you're working for government, because coming through on plans is very critical to the whole process. Targets and plans is very critical to how the government functions. So I think it's very important. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think on technical skills, it's not just all, even in the agriculture itself, sector itself, we need all these skills, and we kept alluding to that. We didn't go into the specifics. I kept talking about giving this sector capacity, and the capacity for me comes from research to technical, to ensuring, to agro dealerships where farmers buy fertilizers, to infrastructure, to feeder roads. I mean, there's whole lots of things, but just to be very, very specific, it's a knowledge-based sector. Without capacity, the way you're talking about it in terms of technical skills, I don't think we'll be able to do it. We need those people to be unlocking the mechanization we're talking about. We start and we fail because we don't have enough technical skills in that area. So I just wanted to say that it's extremely important.
Would anybody like to address the question of is growth sufficient? You know, we all know 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa, but are they growing fast enough? Start with Gabriel and then take Ed's comments.
Yeah, I think the issue is the current growth rate sufficient for transformation? You know, as you pointed out, 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa, but if you flip that over, 6 of the 10 most unequal countries in the world are also in Africa. So the flip side of this growth coin or the growth nini is that the inequality. Is it sufficient? I suppose if you have growth, of, double-digit growth over a period of 10 years or more, you would begin to see transformation. But before you get there, it's perhaps important to interrogate the source of the growth. Is this sustainable growth? As I said, if you are extracting something or selling out licenses and so on, very shallow over a period of 10 years, not sustainable.
Can I just clarify my simple maths, that with population growth in most countries of between 2 and 3%.
Sorry?
Population growths of between 2 and 3%
so
are catching up because unemployment rates are over 50%. Then out of the 6% GDP growth, we all know that a disproportionate percentage of that benefit goes to capital because it's the highest yielding investment market in the world. I say if you add all this up, is 6% enough? And I make reference to China. China has always said we need to grow 8% in order to make the average Chinese better off. So that's a little bit the background of my question.
And over 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
So they've been able to realize that. So I think that answers that. But the role of this development planning, there is a very quiet phenomena happening in this continent called the return of the developmental state. The developmental state is in some cases a euphemism for the return to planned economy and sort of flirting with that idea one more time. I am very skeptic. I think there is a role for state, provided you have strong leadership, adequate institutions, and capacity. Leadership to lead the way and stay the course. Institutions that can regulate and modulate the rules of the game, and capacity to carry out whatever needs to be done. But the notion that a planner in some ministry knows better than the average guy who has a vested interest in what he's doing or she's doing has been discredited in the past. So we need to be really very careful. Yes, there are market imperfections that require state intervention, but that has to be a very minimalist approach where the state intervenes where markets have failed or are likely to fail, or there is this information asymmetry and so on. But if the state overreaches in the name of planning and this and that, then and I think Rwanda is a very good example, really, where they have taken on a very market-oriented economy, but very vibrant state intervention that, especially in the area of regulation and accountability, ministers, governors, at the beginning of the year are given a budget and a work plan and a target. And they sign in public. At the end of the year, they come in public and they are held accountable. And those, those that perform it. So I think this kind of intervention would be ideal, but minimalist.
Thank you. Any additional comments from Julius?
Yeah,
We'll start with Ed.
Yeah, I think on the issue of whether the growth is sustainable, I think you're absolutely right. It's not sustainable.
Not sustainable, sufficient.
It's not sufficient. Yeah. It's not sufficient and it's not sustainable without transformation. And you need 8, maybe 9, 10% growth to be able to accommodate the continuing demographic bulge that we have. Now, on the issue of planning, I beg to differ somehow, in the sense that I don't think what the speaker was talking about was the central planning of the good old days. It's more strategic planning. I mean, if you look at all the countries, the emerging economies, those that are transforming, you take Malaysia, even you take China, they all have 5-year plans that are constantly being revised to keep them relevant and to target the strategic objectives. They have vision about what they want to achieve. Now, the issue that many of the African countries have is that you have development plans, which when another government comes, throws it away, and starts another plan. So there isn't that level of continuity to ensure that whatever has been agreed to, even if it's in infrastructure development, another government comes and tries to dismantle it or do something else. And I think that's the bane of planning today. But if there is a national consensus on the strategic focus, the vision of the country where you're going, and then any government that comes can then continue to build on that, then you would have a much more sustainable system. So I think development planning from that perspective, not the central planning, but development planning from that perspective is important because it gives focus, it gives attention to the areas. In fact, you were talking about looking at your endowments and trying to plan what are the areas that you can create a competitive advantage based on international relative prices. So you're looking at light manufacturing, you could look at textiles, agro-processing, component assembly, and so on. Where can you put your resources in order to create that competitive edge? What are some of the supply and value chain issues that you need to look at in order to become more competitive? And you have to focus on export competitiveness. The reason why I continue to emphasize export competitiveness is that it helps you to benchmark. It helps you to see what is out there. It helps you to be more efficient in the use of your resources and effective in delivery of it. And here, the role of the state is still very important, particularly in integrating the supply chain. If you look at downward supply chain issues, mainly they are port logistics, issues relating to the inputs. If you're looking at even manufacturing, many of the manufactured products that we have, the inputs are imported. But then if you put high tariffs on the inputs, then you are creating a situation where you cannot be competitive. So the state needs to be very, very strategic in the way it looks at these areas and pick what you might call the winners, because they are areas that you can, because you have the endowments, you have the capacity, you can build on it. And the other issue about technology, if you look at African economies today, the level of technological upgrading is very, very low. Very, very low. And that is also not creating the competitive edge. But the way you do it is not to have massive vocational education here and there. It must be targeted at specific industries where you think you have the endowments, rather than trying to go all out in vocational and technical education. You have to be more strategic. In the sectors that you've picked, how do you increase the technological upgrading? How do you train people in those areas to be able to be much more productive and increase productivity in the sector? So I think these are the kinds of things that I believe that we need to do in order to make this happen.
Thank you. Julius, your thoughts on the issues raised?
Okay, thank you very much. I think, a lot has been discussed by the other panel, but I just want to add the following. One is Africa has to be well led. For us to do all these things we're talking about, our leadership in Africa must love Africa. The challenge with the elite is that they are predatory to the continent. They want to eat and exclude others. And unless we change that attitude, that culture of being a predator, they are predators to the state, we'll have a challenge. We must love the continent, we must love other people, and we want them to be included in the economy. Because a lot of African leaders are masters of platitude. They will say everything nice, but what they do is opposite. So they will say, oh, we love the people, oh, we hate white people, but they do exactly what, opposite of what they are saying. So we need to have leaders who really mean what they say and they do it. I mean, all of us admire the Singapores of this world, but how many African leaders want to be Lee Kuan Yew?
One.
I don't know. Because you see, Lee Kuan Yew still lives in the same house he lived before he became prime minister. How many are willing to do that? Because that's really the mark of inclusion, that you don't want to be a predator to the state. So if we don't sort that one out, then the second thing is, once you have a clean leader, you must also have a clever government. And clever government means a functional public service. For us then to provide public goods are the common things. These common things have to be provided for by a clever public service, which is by extension a clever government. Unfortunately, most of the people who are in public service are relatives of the elite, and they are there also as predators. So you have a predator leader, a predator public service. You can't move. And unless we align, so the state, through its organs, the public service and various organs of the public service, must be well-meaning. They must be there to serve the people of Africa. All of us admiring Rwanda, but it's well-aligned. The leader is very strong. He means well for his country, and he has aligned the public service to provide public goods so that then the private sector can thrive on those efficient public goods. If there's no alignment there, we will talk here until Jesus comes. So it's very important. And then the other thing, the third one, is the discipline of execution. We can have all these development things, whether you call them development plans or vision statements, 2020, 2030, it doesn't matter. If there is no discipline of execution, and that doesn't mean just government alone, it is the entire populace being disciplined and aligned to the aspirations of the country. I mean, in Rwanda, we're all admiring it, but if you look at what goes on in Rwanda, the entire population has been psyched and disciplined to love their country. That's why it's more secure, because then they have been psyched like that. It is cleaner because the population has been psyched. They have even been told to wear shoes. It's all part of cleaning up the mind. So if we don't have that discipline of execution, everything falls. And then also, government knowing when to intervene. Sometimes you have an interfering government. I agree with the gentleman there who said the government must measure what to intervene in. But the first thing is to provide a conducive and a competitive business environment. The minute you see the level of competition high in a particular sector, the government must begin to recede. But if, for example, that there are challenges in a particular sector where it's a dominant monopoly, government intervention becomes important, but it must be a clever government. Sometimes governments sustain huge monopolies because there are people in government who benefit from that huge monopoly. So it becomes then a predator to the state rather than an enabler of the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, there are a lot of hands, and we're technically out of time, so I'm just going to check with the powers that be whether I can take any more or whether we should cut it here. Okay. Okay, 5 minutes more. So in order to get some sort of something meaningful out of this, I'm going to time people, and you each have 30 seconds to make your point. Otherwise, it will not happen. We'll start with James and Wangi over there. I apologize to anyone who isn't picked. Okay, go. Yeah, I can, but I don't know if, is the microphone on? Yeah.
All right, great. Looking at, we have talked
Thank you. Next comment. Yeah, we'll take the gentleman in the second row here. I'll take as many as I can.
Yes, Tadia, I know, PASGA, Partnership for African Social and Governance Research. We've heard a lot about policy and markets. I'm interested in what kind of political arrangements do we really need to make this work in terms of the delivery of public goods, and what can the people do about it?
Okay, thank you. I'll take one more here. Yes, gentleman in the middle, very quickly, and then I'll take one more from the right. It's first hands that stand out.
Thank you. Mine is on these two concepts, inclusive growth and rapid growth. What is the intersection of these two concepts? Inclusive growth and rapid growth. Can we?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a lady, yeah, second row.
My question is, as private sector and the thought leaders, are we doing enough in the policy, influencing policy? Because we talked a lot about how much policy is influencing the growth and inclusive growth, but how much are we doing as private sector, not just talking about the general recommendations to the government, but sticking in there, giving the nitty-gritties until something comes out of it, for example, what equity now we are celebrating, or M-Pesa.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, that's as much as I can squeeze in, unfortunately. I really apologize to anyone who hasn't been able to ask a question. Very quickly, each of the panelists, would you like to respond to or comment on anything that's been said? Anybody? Very briefly.
Okay, thank you very much. I think James Mwangi talked about inequality. I think the greatest source of inequality in Africa is the failure of the tax system. That's it. If the tax system worked as is envisaged in many laws, that inequality would not be there. What has happened is that the elite escape paying tax, and so you widen the inequality significantly. So government must work. Again, you go back to a clever government, and then, of course, the political arrangements, it goes to leadership. If there is any weakness in Africa from a management perspective, it's just that one single word, leadership. Until we fix it, this idea of can we drive rapid growth will not arise. And then, of course, there was the issue of private sector. What can private sector do? We just have to understand. Private sector responds to incentives, and capital follows the highest return. So we must then align private sector to the country aspirations, which ties up with where does inclusion and rapid growth meet? It meets with the country strategy. Country strategy combined with private sector aligning to that country strategy, then it drives the growth.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Agnes.
Maybe just to talk about the question on the role of governments in delivery of public goods. I think there are quite a number, but if you look at it mostly from a regulatory perspective, that governments actually initiate or get policies done and then go in there to regulate them to ensure that the right things are done. So I really look at it mostly, let's get the policies done and let's create a conducive environment that is well regulated so that the private sector can do what it's supposed to do. Now, that takes me to the question on policy influence by the private sector. The private sector actually has a huge role to initiate policies. So I think many times probably that is not well recognized, but there has to be a platform where private sector does initiate policies, because it's the failures in how we do business that lead to policy formulation. So this might be something that's not working well at the private sector side. This might be something that's not working well at how we regulate business that initiates a policy to be put in place. So we have a huge role to play there. The question is, do we recognize that we have a huge role to play there as private sector?
Thank you.
Yeah, just to come back to James' point, inequality, yeah, it's there, will be there with us for some time to come. I think the thing to watch is this increasing at an accelerated rate. If that's the case, then there's reason to worry. But there will always be, if you will, what they call underclass. the question is, what kind of policies do we have in place to take care of that population? The elderly, those that are not able to actively engage in the economy. And I think the rest of us who are active in the economy have an obligation to take care of them during this transition. Some will make it out, others will remain there, and that's just how the cookie crumbles, as they say. The intersection, somebody said, what's the intersection between? That's an interesting question, but I was sitting here trying to do a little graph to see where this thing, but I think that's a moving target. You know, the optimal point of intersection between the two cannot be sort of estimated. I mean, I would imagine that as you get more inclusive or less inclusive, the graph will shift, the optimal point will shift up or down. So I would say look at the trend and not the precise point where these two overlap, and it clearly will differ from country to country. But you have a good economist sitting next to you, maybe you should ask him and he can explain it to you, the guy from Rockefeller. So,
thank you. Yeah. Just one response on the political arrangement. I think that there is no blueprint. I mean, what kind of political arrangement would lead to an inclusive growth? There's no blueprint. But at least what I know is that you need to have good leadership. You know, in all the countries that have transformed and are inclusive, I think the overriding characteristics is that you have a leadership that has a single-minded focus to inclusiveness and transformation. You know, Lin Kuan Yew is not, I mean, you wouldn't say that Singapore is really a democratic setting, but being able to do that. If I may mention also in Rwanda today, they are doing marvelously well, but there are commentaries about the political economy. So there are issues of that nature. Now, the issue about the private sector, I think you still have to look at it, and I fully agree with the the CEO for the equity company over there, that private sector would always maximize their profit. Now, what government has to create an enabling environment to crowd in the private sector, listen to them, and to be able to harness that powerful force for growth. In the final analysis, it is the private sector that would create the jobs. It's not the government. So I think there is a need for that public-private partnership. I'm not talking about public-private partnership in infrastructure. I'm talking about broadly based public-private collaboration to see how you can basically, you know, bring in the synergies that each has to make sure that things work well.
Now we have very unfortunately run out of time. By now, most of you will have one of these things, a Pokin. There is a Pokin board over there. I believe it's a feedback board, and please do touch your Pokin onto the, I think I've got this right, have I? Yes, okay. Touch it onto the appropriate option. You have this, or this. And I'm hoping to avoid this, but do give us feedback. Thank you very much. Just by way of a very quick summary, inclusive and rapid growth have to go hand in hand. The key question is how. And there's obviously a lot of complexity. And there's a lot more that could be said about it, needs to be said about it, and a lot of things we haven't touched on. But I hope that you found the discussion thought-provoking, and I hope that you found it insightful, and no doubt to be continued. So please join me in thanking the panel for the discussion. Thank you.